Here we go. You ready? Y'all ready?
Yep.
All right. Section 3. A few words on the preface to Wretched. Here we go. You may be tempted, as I was, to skip the reading of the preface. Oh wait, no. I'm gonna reread this. Yeah, of the preface, thinking it a poor substitute for the words of Fanon. Or you may think it unnecessary to read that what appears as one of Europeans' address to other Europeans on purely European concerns. In either case, you'd be mistaken. You'd be mistaken. Sartre said beforehand, essentially, that Fanon says on the most of the major themes of the book. I only take issue with one assertion made by Sartre, as you'll see below. Otherwise, the preface is as good a place as any to begin one study of the Meditations upon Wretched. And here we go, 3A. The struggles against racism and colonialism, capitalism, involve struggle between classes in both the objective and the subjective senses of the term, i.e., as groups whose position is narrowly defined in economic terms, and as groups distinguished by their standings, quote unquote, their consciousness, and their political and social practice. Sartre opens on the theme of class struggle, i.e., the manufacture, quote unquote, of a quote native elite, a bourgeoisie sham from beginning to end, which serves as intermediary between the people and colonialism and is branded with, quote, the principles of Western culture. The contemporary decolonization process, our own in particular, involves struggles between the class forces within colonized society and is a central importance in the fight for liberation and social revolution. To paraphrase both Sartre and Fanon, in order to effectively engage and overcome the settler imperialist state, we must fight among ourselves and to struggles forming parts of a whole from beginning to end. Some of the new concepts that we must work out involved, quote, class, to interpret and reinterpret the concept and break it free of definitions grounded in dogma, quote, Western centeredness, or base bias of other schools, biases of others, schools of thought, and political tendencies. Our emphasis regarding the concept has to shift from the purely objective, i.e., relations to the means of production, the size or source of income, etc., all rather economistic, and begin to include the objective criteria, i.e., the recognition of common interests and a common opponent, common organizations to pursue those interests and defeat that opponent, a common vision of what we want the new society to look like, a common language, a medium for new consciousness. For the new consciousness. We also need to work out new concepts in relations to major forms of class struggle, i.e., ideological, political, and socio-cultural, as well as economic, and begin the efforts, theoretical and practical, to ground the new forms of a mass base, a quote proletarian, revolutionary, socialist line, and class standing. I think that overall the most important form of mass-based class struggle would be ideo-theoretical, to promote the intellectual development of the majority of the people, to guide practice in all fields. It never hurts to raise these points at every appropriate opportunity. The anti-intellectualism in the US and the rest of the West, or whatever is about having the people hooked on a quote what to think program rather than a quote how to think program. Everyone is or should be intellectuals because my phone, this freaking thing, stop going off and on. Intellectual. Okay, my phone, for some reason the charger keeps fucking with me. Stop. And it's like making me like I'm a little like, what do you call it, distracted by it. Everyone is or should be intellectuals because we all have mental capacities and a need to develop and use it in the collective mastery of our society. Fanon repeatedly points to the need for the people, not just the intellectuals, to be enlightened, to develop political and social consciousness, to accept responsibility for the entire social and political process. How can this be done if people don't think, question, develop their critical capacity, study and process of social development, and know that they can change social reality? And I think that's what's great about political education, is because no matter how many books I've read, it's nice to have the political education and the orienting tasks to be able to study further these foundational texts that a lot of that a lot of people get when they join a movement such as like a communist movement. As touched already, it's not just the quote West of the as we generally think of it, but quote Marxism in its predominant forms, which emphasizes economic elements and does the bourgeoisie order itself, at the expense of ideological ones, superstructural ones. Thus, we overlook the importance of ideological struggle, the role of ideology, ideas in the maintenance of capitalism and in the struggle to overthrow it. If people are to struggle for a particular vision, they must make conscious decisions to do so, informed decisions. When Sartre used the term, quote, manufactured, quote unquote, with respect to the colonized elite, he doesn't mean that no class structures exist in African societies prior to European colonization. Similarly, when he refers to the lack of homogeneity in the colonized world as being, quote, born of colonial history, that too needs clarification, because one would assume that any or all social, political, and economic division, i.e. class division, and lack of unity in oppressed societies today are solely the result of imperialist oppression. And that's not the reality, even though some, quote, elites, forces within oppressed societies find it in their interest to promote such false image. Here's how Kwame Nkrumah attempted to correct the false imagery of classless African society. And Kwame Nkrumah made a mistake in not observing in Ghana the petite bourgeoisie, that there is class relations within Africa. So he made a mistake, got overthrown, and then like after that he reevaluated, did a reclass analysis, and found out, yes, I was incorrect, and made the adjustments. Okay. Today, the phrase African socialism seems to espouse the view that the traditional African society was a classless society imbued with the spirit of humanism, and to express the nostalgia of that spirit. Such a conception of socialism makes a fetish of the communal African society, but an idyllic African classless society in which there were no rich and no poor, enjoying the drugged, is that drugged? Serenity.
Yes.
Certainly a facile simplification. There is no historical or even anthropological evidence for any such a society. I am afraid the realities of African society were somewhat more sordid. All available evidence from the history of Africa up to the eve of European colonization shows that African society was neither classless nor devoid of a social hierarchy. Feudalism existed in some parts of Africa before colonization, and feudalism involved a deeper and exploitative social stratification founded on the ownership of land. It must also be noted that slavery existed in Africa before European colonization. Although the earlier European contact gave slavery in Africa some of its most vicious characteristics, the truth remains. I got another one. Jesus Christ. The truth remains, however, that before colonization, which became widespread in Africa only in the 19th century, Africans were prepared to sell often for no more than 30 pieces of silver, followed tribesmen, and even members of the same extended family and clan. Colonialism deserves to be blamed for many evils in Africa, but surely it was not preceded by the African Golden Age or paradise. A return to a pre-colonial African society is evidently not worthy of the ingenuity and efforts of our people. All this notwithstanding, one would still argue that the basic organization of many African society is different in different periods of history, manifests a certain colonialism, and that the philosophy of humanists purpose behind the organizations are worthy of recapture. A community in which each saw his well-being in the welfare of a group certainly was praiseworthy, even if the manner in which the well-being of the group was pursued make no contribution to our purposes. Thus, what socialists thought in Africa must recapture is not the structure of the traditional African society, but its spirit. For the spirit of communalism is crystallized in its humanism and in its reconciliation of individuals' advancements with group welfare. All right, here we go. Pre-colonial African societies had their own elites, their own classes, and class struggles. Imperialism merely arrested the independent development of these social formations and stamped them with, quote, the principles of Western culture: greed, exploitation, individualism, patriarchy. These weren't peculiar to the West, and they were among the indigenous traits looked for by colonizing agents as they sought out, quote, promising adolescents, end quote, to join the first generations of, quote, go-betweens. And the very first, quote, go-between were adult members of the colonized society, whose pre-existing class, consciousness, and interests led them to serve the interest of imperialism, which found pre-existing African class structures and used them to serve its purpose. We're talking about comprador classes. That are set up. Let's give some attention to the meaning of the creation of native elites. Of course, not unrelated to colonialism creation of the native, and keeping in mind that Fanon makes an effort to point out that both the native and the settler are creations of colonialism. As that tree describes the evolution of succeeding generations of the elite, also succeeding generations of natives, or the changing structures of colonized societies under the impact of colonialism. He takes us from discussions to those discussions of those who speak only when ordered to through to the fourth generation represented by Fanon. These are, quote, ex-natives who began to blend the language of the colonizer to the new requirements of colonized people. What is an ex-native, quote unquote? Essentially the same as an ex-person of color, an ex-N-word, an ex-black person, even an ex-African American. Fanon gives the key when he points out that, quote, because it is a systematic negation of the other person and a furious determination to deny the other person all attributes of humanity, colonialism forces the people its dominance to ask themselves the question constantly, quote, in reality, who am I, end quote. The, quote, native and the, quote, black person, they use the N-word, the, quote, black and the African American, these are persons who are struggling for a new identity, which can only result when they attain or regain freedom as a people. They figures. There are persons who have been denied independent development and the unfettered expression of their own ideologies. They haven't yet accepted the responsibility to develop a self-awareness because they can't or won't de-link from the definition of humanity established by the oppressor. And the oppressor constantly telling them that they aren't human. Let's pick up where Fanon. Here's Fanon, I think. The defensive attitudes created by the violent bringing together of the colonized people and the colonial system from themselves into a structure which then reveals the colonized personality. This sensitivity is easily understood if we simply study and are alive to the number of depth of the injuries inflicted upon the native during a single day spent amidst the colonial regime. It must, in any case, be remembered that the colonized people is not only simply a dominated people. Under the German occupation of the French remained men, i.e. people, human and French. Under French occupation, the Germans remained men. In Algeria, there is not simply the domination, but a decision to the latter, not to occupy anything more than the sum total of the land. The Algerians, the veiled women, the palm trees, and the camels make up the landscape, the natural background to human presence of the French. Hostile nature, obstinate, right? Obstinate? Obstinate and fundamentally rebellious is in fact represented in the colonies by the bush, by the mosquitoes, the mosquitoes, natives, and the mosquitoes, natives, and fever. And colonization is a success when all this undocile nature has been finally tamed. Railway across the bush, the draining of swamps, and a native population which is non-existent politically and economically are in fact one and the same thing. Reflect. I think this is reflect. The movie Shaka Zulu, the British scouting party, quote unquote, is swept ashore by the storm. As they gather themselves on the beach, they're approached by a regiment of Zulu soldiers, because he speaks the language of the Zulu. One of the party is taken to Shaka. In the next scene, Shaka asked him, quote, "Of what tribe are you?" And the man answers, "Dutch." When we cut to it, Shaka's question was about what we now call nationality. Shaka asked the man, of what people are you? And Fanon has just told us what. And under German occupation, the French remain French. And under French occupations, the Germans remain German. That the Algerians made up part of the landscape to the human presence of French colonialism. We'll get deeper into this below, but the point to be made here is that the problem arises when the colonized people forget who they are, forget that they are human, and succumb to the ideology of the colonizers, which claims that only the settlers are human. This results in this results in the colonized people believing that they have to prove their humanity to the colonizer, but the standards are those of the colonizers, not those of the colonized. The colonized people simply fail to continue to define themselves for themselves. The native, the black person, they use the N-word, and the person of color and black person and the African American have no identity apart from that given them by the colonizer. That is not unless they resist colonialism, which entails one, the maintenance of an identity that is separate and distinct from that of the colonizer and from that given them by the colonizer. Yeah. Two, they began to develop a new identity through the process of decolonization. Though having remained separate and distinct, colonized people aren't who they are prior to colonization, and they can't return to the past. Colonization has arrested their independent development, distorted who they are and how they must become a new people during the process by which they regained their independency. Now the population native to the land under colonial domination is non-existent politically and economically. What exactly does that mean? In essence, it means that they aren't sovereign, which is why Fanon uses the phrase, quote, the restoration of the nationhood to the people. It doesn't mean in a strict sense that they aren't, quote, involved in politics or that they aren't involved in the economic system. It means that the political and economic processes that they participate in are not of their own design, not under their control, and don't serve their interests. This point is particularly relevant to us and to neocolonial situations, generally, i.g., having a job and money and, quote, being a part of the American economy doesn't mean that you're not colonized. Being able to vote in the American political process doesn't mean you're not colonized. It all simply means that you've been tricked and that you're still avoiding reality and confrontation with capitalism and its post-neo-colonial forms. Here, I'm gonna wait till I don't know where it's at. Here's another key point. It is not like I'm saying anything new here. Du Bois was talking about this and, quote, double consciousness, end quote, and the need to make the choice between being a black person, which they use the N-word, and being a American. Raphael Ellison talked about it in Invisible Man when the guy was asked, who am I? A native, or rather an ex-native. It is one who is constantly in the making and who is cured of the mental pathology, which is the direct product of oppression, and who claims the identity apart from that of the colonizers and the colonial system, and struggles to become a new person and to build a new society. And we're going to read what it says here. In the period of colonization, when it is not contested by armed resistance, when the sum total of harmful nervous stimuli oversteps a certain threshold, the defensive attitude of the natives give way, and they then find themselves crowding the mental hospitals. There is thus, during this calm period of successful colonization, a regular and important mental pathology, which is the direct product of oppression. Nice. Hey, welcome in. Welcome in. Restricted lifted. Thank you. Another important theme touched by Sartre in the preface is that on the successive generations of elites, each generation also reflecting phases of colonial violence and the development of social class structures and struggle, characterizing the fundamental contradictions which, oh my gosh, another restriction. I'm not doing anything wrong. Jesus Christ. Its aspects and forms, their roles and interests, the relations between the elites and the masses, and between the elites and colonialism. As you read, okay, let me reread that. Another important theme to touch by Sartre in the preface is that on the successive generations of elites, each generation also reflects phases of colonial violence and the development of social class structure and struggle, characterizing the fundamental contradictions, its aspects and forms, their role and interest, the relations between the elites and the masses, and between the elites and colonialism. As you read, stop now and then to meditate upon the similar development of generations of elites among our own people, which is black people, not white people, and look for all the implications and the need for reinterpretation of the story. For example, as Phyllis Wheatley, representative of the promising adolescents, quote unquote, that were sought out among African colonized by U.S. settler colonialism. What she and others accurately represented is in one important respect a matter of interpretation, i.e., from the proletarian, revolutionary, New African, and nationalist perspective, or from the bourgeoisie, assimilationist, colonialist perspective. In Africa, and in New Africa, the first generation of elites established under the colonial system had little or no dependent voice or initiatives. They expressed little or no resistance to colonialism, and they didn't represent the revolutionary interests of the people. Who cares if Phyllis Wheatley was, quote, the first black person to publish, quote, what did she say? Publish, what did she say? Did she call George Washington a settler colonialist, slave owner? Did she call upon the newly colonized Africans to rise up and throw off the chains? Did she bend the language to the new requirements of the people as they sought to regain independence and sovereignty? The point is this: even in 17th century colonial America, new Africans were trying to regain their independence. That is, most of them were, while others were trying to accommodate themselves to the new colonial situation. In the 18th and 19th century, here saw the rise of our second generations of elites, I.G. William Whymper. And there was also the rise of nationalist and socialist voices, speaking to the struggle to regain independence and create a new social system. The third generation of elites was distinguished from those preceding it by a greater degree of frustration over their failure to be included. They pushed the struggle for integration and equality while strengthening their base as a class. But again, there were left petty bourgeois currents. The evolution of those earlier nationalist and socialist voices. Most importantly, there were the masses of the people who had always maintained an identity and a set of interests that were and remain separate and distinct from those of the colonizers. Without this base of foundation, the elite would have no standing. Why are we not more aware of the social realities and political consciousness of the lower classes, the majority of the people? Not more aware of the existence of the nationalist and socialist currents in our social development, because the tendency that they represent haven't written enough of the history books or otherwise been legitimate as a propagandors of our propagators of our story. Thank you. The elite forces that write the books, especially those marketable or acceptable books, get time to talk on talk shows and space in the U.S. press. They interpret our past and issue a commentary on current events through their own class perspectives and based on their own class interests that they hold in common with their capitalist colonialist masters. Rebuilding requires reorientation and reinterpretation. We don't yet have what could be called a revolutionary people's history, because those doing the medium promoted and legitimated writings are part of the wrong class and express the wrong interests. But a reinterpretation of our story is necessary, and there'll be no independence or socialism without it. The intellectuals who write what we need must represent a combination of those who commit class suicide and those who, quote, come up from the people. So organic intellectuals. And those who, yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. These days, it supposedly passes a common knowledge that a major consequence of the major aim of a counter-revolutionary initiative that went into high gear in the late 1960s and early 1970s was the thrust of pseudo-bourgeois and petty bourgeois forces into leadership. And yet, we claim to be confused and unable to explain the present absence of progressive and revolutionary momentum from the bottom up. I like to look to 1968. Let's call it a, quote, high tide of our decolonization struggle. As symbols of the people's revolutionary nationalist initiatives, I see those brothers standing with raised fists during the Olympic Games, raised fists that are like raised flags of red, black, and green. Look to 1968 and the establishment of the Kenner Commission and its mandate, quote, to determine what happened, why it happened, that the U.S. needs to do to prevent it from happening again. The Kenner Commission was like any other body established by the colonial powers, i.e. Kenya, Britain, to investigate disturbances in the colony, to divert the revolutionary drive of oppressed peoples into mere reformism, to grant, quote, formal independency, and shape a neo-colonial situation. It can't be done without an alliance between colonialism and pseudo bourgeoisie and petite bourgeoisie forces among the oppressed peoples. Underlining the, quote, civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, the riots, rebellions, and revolts was a revolutionary, socialist, and nationalist initiative. So what did the settler colonialists say? Quick, let's decolonize, let's integrate, i.e. include some of them and make the rest of them believe that they are Americans too. Reflect on this. It was in those same Olympic Games that George Foreman ran around the boxing ring waving the flag of the U.S. Even symbolically, this captures the reality of the moves made between 1968 and 1972. It represents the success of counter-revolution, the success of the neo-colonial situation. But it was really a post-neo-colonial solution, because the first neo-colonial structure had been established 100 years earlier. The ascendancy of the, quote, new black middle class and the quote, black liberation movement was turned into its opposite. Even Robert Allen's interpretation of the period can help to give sight to the blind. Another restriction. How many restrictions am I going to get?
8.
How many? Jesus Christ. In the United States today, I'm only reading a book, TikTok. In the United States today, a program of domestic neocolonialism is rapidly advancing. It was designed to counter the potentially revolutionary thrust of the recent black rebellions in major cities across the country. This program was formulated by Americans' corporate elites, the major owners, managers, and directors of the giant corporations, banks, and foundations, which increasingly dominate the economy and society as a whole, because they believe that the urban revolts pose a serious threat to economic and social stability. And they are attempting with considerable success to co-opt the Black Power movement, their strategy to equate Black Power with Black capitalism. In this task, the white corporate elites has found an ally in the black bourgeoisie, the new militant black middle class, which become a significant social force following World War II. The member of this class consists of black professionals, technicians, executives, professors, government workers, etc., who get their new jobs and new status in the past 2 decades. They were made militant by the civil rights movement, yet many of them have come to oppose integrationism because they have seen its failure. Like the black masses, they denounce the old black elites of Toming preachers. Ooh, I don't know if I was meant. Teachers, preachers, teachers, and businessmen, politicians. The new black elite seeks to overthrow and take the place of the old elite. To do this, it has forged an informal alliance with the corporate forces which run white and black America. The new black elite announced that it supports Black Power. Undoubtedly, many of its members were sincere in this declaration, but the fact is that they spoke for themselves as a class and not for the vast majority of black people who were not middle class. In effect, this new elite told the power structure, quote, "Give us a piece of the action and we will run the black communities and keep them quiet for you." Recognizing that the old, quote, black leader, which they used the N-word, had become irrelevant in this new age of black militancy and black revolt. The white corporatist accepted this implicit invitation and encouraged the development of constructive black power. They endorsed the new black elite as their tactic agents in the black community, and black self-determination has come to mean control of black communities by a native elite, which is beholden to the white power structure. Thus, while it is true that black people have been granted formal political equality, the prospect is, barring any radical changes, that black America will continue to be a semi-colony of white America, although the colonial relationship will take new forms. So yeah, ever developing and shit. Remember, Allen published the above in 1970, taking just a peep at what's happening today. George Curry, writing the Emerge 11 to 99, that the attack on affirmative action would essentially wipe out the black middle class. If we can't go to college in significant numbers, if we are not able to take our rightful place in the job market, and if we cannot take advantage of the tax dollars we provide to our government bodies, we will be relegated to a life of second-class citizenship. My emphasis. We talked to and for his class, not the people as a whole. And to the skip gates, also speaking in Emerge, is it Emerge? Emerge 9 to Merge. 3 to Merge 3 to 99, as he talks about the roles of his class and of his group of intellectuals at Harvard. A purpose is to get more black people to the middle class. Is this some sort of black trickle down theory? Do I really need to expound on this? How are we doing so far? Everybody okay? Anybody had anything to say? Add?
Everything's good so far.
I'll wait till the end.
Okay. All right. Satri. Okay, let's see here. Okay. So we're looking for a cross, and we're looking for an asterisk. Okay. Satri's reference to the peasantry reminded me that Fanon's popularity among bloods in the U.S. and the 1960s rested in part upon his characterization of the peasantry and the lumpen as revolutionary and or as the, quote, vanguard. These characterizations have been widely and successively challenged or clarified over the years and on an international level. While our practice has proven an unsoundedness of prior beliefs, we fail to put the premise to a thorough theoretical analysis and put it to rest, which will allow this or similar correct views to surface again and to disrupt the momentum of the next revolutionary thrust. Okay, here we go. And a revolutionary class must, one, recognize that it's a class and that its members have common interests and enemies. Two, engage in conscious, unified action in pursuit of its interests. Three, act as the vanguard of the whole people. Fanon clearly describes both the peasantry and the lumpen as initially absent these features. Why then did he refer to them as revolutionary? And we're going to read that real quick. The starving peasants outside of the class system is the first among the exploited to discover that only violence pays. For him, there is no compromise, no coming to terms. Colonization and decolonization are simply a question of relative strength. These questions are all the more necessary because Fanon later described... You have to
read the other one too. The cross was there.
Hold on a sec here. 3. Oh, so it's both. Okay. It is within this mass of humanity, this people of the shanty towns, at the core of the lumpen proletariat, that the rebellion will find its urban spearhead. For the lumpen proletariat, that horde of starving men, uprooted from their tribe and from their clan, constitutes one of the most spontaneous and the most radically revolutionary forces of a colonized people. All right. These questions are all the more necessary because Fanon later describes both the peasantry and the lumpen in different terms, and his subsequent comments on the peasantry seems to confirm the observation that he saw in them a force that was spontaneously resisting certain principles of Western culture, and that segments or strata of the peasantry sporadically resisted colonial occupation. Fanon bends the stick several times in Wretched in the order to emphasize a point. In this instance, he bent it in order to contrast the elite and the reactionary bourgeoisie classes and strata against the, quote, traditional, patriotic, and progressive strata and class embryonic within the people as a whole. And then we're going to read another thing. We must remember that colonialism has often strengthened or established its domination by organizing and petrification of the country district, ringed around the marabouts, which doctors and customary chieftains, the majority of country dwellers, are still living in the feudal manner, and the full power of this medieval structure of society is maintained by the settlers, military, administrative, and officials. I got another violation, everybody. Other people don't like show their shit. Come on now. Moreover, Fanon's characterization of the lumpen was also not uniform, i.e., his pointed to progressive and reactionary tendencies within the strata leaves us to conclude that the lumpen is essentially of a petit bourgeois character, i.e., vacillating and illegitimate, or would-be capitalist and parasite. Keep in mind, simply, wait, I gotta read this part.
No, right there. Yeah.
I know, I saw it. Colonialism will also find in the lumpen proletariat a considerable space for maneuvering. For this reason, any movement of freedom ought to be given its fullest attention to this lumpen proletariat. The peasant masses will always answer the call to rebellion, but if the rebellion's leaders think it will be able to develop without taking the masses into consideration, the lumpen proletariat will throw itself into the battle and will take part in the conflict, but this time on the side of the oppressors. Keep in mind, simply performing an objectively... Hold on a second, they want me to do a puzzle now. Jesus Christ. Keep in mind, simply performing an objectively political or progressive act doesn't reflect the subjective class revolutionary consciousness, just as consciousness alone is inefficient to change the world, because it takes physicalness. Contrary to Sartre's, Fanon's message to oppressed peoples does include important themes on the character and roles of citizens of settler imperialist states. I'd like to think that Sartre was simply overzealous when he says of Fanon, quote, if he had wished to describe in all its details the historical phenomenon of decolonization, he would have spoken of us. This is not at all his intention. That's simply not true. And Sartre even contradicts himself when in P89 he says, quote, why read it if it is not written for us? For two reasons. The first is that Fanon explains you to his people and shows them the Manichaeism by which we are estranged from ourselves. And in P10, he gives a second reason that Fanon brings, quote, the process of history into a clear light of day, that the dialectics of liberal hypocrisy hides from you, in which it is as much reasonable for our existence as for his. My emphasis. Okay. In the first page of Wretched, Fanon introduced us to the Manichaean ideology of the colonial system of the West, and he makes it clear that the colonized people adopt this Manichaean perspective in their evaluation of the settlers and themselves. However, as I pointed out above, Fanon is taking us through a process of development. By the end of the second chapter, he shows us how and why the colonized people began to abandon that form of dualism. In this connection, Deborah Warwick says, quote, "How can a people wage an anti-colonial struggle without reinforcing and replicating the very categories that have organized its own oppression? Or, put it another way, how can necessarily a Manichaean combat promote a post-Manichaean world?" Fanon's answer stated simply is that the oppressed people must reject and abandon Manichaean division if they want to avoid reinforcing and replicating them. In a paragraph that should be reflected upon in its entirety, he points out that, quote, racialism and hatred and resentment cannot sustain a war of liberation. Okay, go. I'm gonna read down below. Here we go. And this is Fanon, I think. Racial feelings. Oh, is it radical feelings? No, it's no D. It's racial. I always get radical and racial mixed up all the fucking time. Racial feelings, as opposed to racial prejudice and that determination to fight for one's life, which characterizes the native's reply to oppression, are obviously good enough reasons for joining in the fight. But you do not carry on a war, nor suffer brutal and widespread repression, nor look on while all hatred triumphs. All other members of our family are wiped out in order to make racialism or hatred triumph. Racialism and hatred and resentment, a legitimate desire for revenge, cannot sustain a war of liberation. Those enlightening flashes of consciousness which fling the body into stormy paths, or which throw it into an almost pathological trance, where the face of the other beckons me on to giddiness. There, where my blood calls, or the blood of the other, where by sheer inertia, my death calls for the death of the other. That intense emotion of the first few hours falls to pieces if it is left to feed on its own substance. It is true that the never-ending exaction of the colonial forces reintroduce emotional elements into the struggle and give the militant fresh motives for hating and new reasons to go off hunting for a settler who to shoot. But the leaders realized day in and day out that hatred alone cannot draw up a program. You will only risk the defeat of your own ends if you depend on the enemy, who, of course, will always manage to commit as many crimes as possible, to widen the gap and to throw the whole people on the side of rebellion. At all events, we have noticed the enemy tries to win the support of certain sectors of the population, of certain districts, of certain chiefs. As the struggle is carried on, instructions are issued to the settlers and to the police forces. Their behavior takes a different complexion. It becomes more human. They even go so far as to call a native mister when they have dealings with him. Attention and action and acts of courtesy comes to be the rule. The native is in fact made to feel that things are changing. That was a little bit of a more elaboration on what they're talking about for him. He then adds that people reach a point in the struggle when they began to, quote, take stock of the situation, increase their knowledge and their political and social consciousness. And this allows them to, quote, pass from total discriminating nationalism to social and economic awareness. The people who at the beginning of the struggle had adopted the primitive Manichaeanism of the settler, black people and whites, Arabic people and Christians, realize as they go along that the fact of having a national flag and a hope of an independent nation does not always tempt certain strata of the population to give up their interests and privileges. The people find out that the Inquisition is an
It's a word I do not know.
Or we're gonna have to find it out. Another restriction. Look at all the restrictions. What the fuck?
Trying to hit my 8.
God damn. Iniquitous facts of exploitation can wear a black face or an Arabic one, and they
No,
write.
Arabic is their writing. Arab is who they are.
Okay, so I'm not okay. Arab one, and they raise the cry of treason, but the cry is mistaken, and the mistake must be corrected. The treason is not national; it is social. In their weary road towards rational knowledge, the people must also give up their too simple conceptions of their overlords. The species is breaking up under their very eyes. As they look around them, they notice that certain settlers do not join in the general guilty wildness. There are indifferences in the same species. Such people who were before included without distinctions and indiscriminately in the monolithic mass of the foreigner presence actually go so far as to condemn the colonial war. The scoundrel explodes. Then the prototypes of this division of the species go over to the colonized people, become inwards, which means black, or Arabs, and accept suffering, torture, and death. Fanon continues, quote, the settler is not simply the person that must be killed. Many members of the mass of colonialists reveal themselves to be much nearer to the national struggle than certain sons and daughters of the nation. The bearers of blood and race prejudice are broken down on both sides. Consciousness slowly dawns upon truths that are only partial, limited, and unstable. Thus, we began to refuse to identify ourselves, refuse to identify anyone in racial terms. When Fanon says early on that, quote, what parcels out the world is to begin with the fact of belonging to or not belonging to a given race or given species. He is not putting this forth as an unalterable reality, but as something that needs to be changed. He merely describes the Manichaean world, the capitalist colonialist world, the imperialist world. He reflecting the state of consciousness of colonized peoples as they began the struggle to become new people. When Fanon later talks about the species breaking up before our eyes, or about inward disappearing it says he's talking about the breakup of races themselves, the races which were constructed as part of the construction of world capitalism, and which must be deconstructed along with the deconstruction of capitalism. The breakup of the species now identified by skin color becomes a new species to be characterized by what people think and by what they do, distinguished by social and political consciousness and economic awareness. Warwick also notes that Fanon didn't separate friends from enemies by the use of any fixed notion, such as race or religion. And she cites a passage from Fanon's, quote, Dying Colonialism, quote, for the FLN in the new society being built where there are only Algerians. For the outset, therefore, every individual living in Algeria is an Algerian. In tomorrow's independent Algeria, it will be up to every Algerian to assume Algerian citizenship or to reject it in favor of another. How did Fanon distinguish friends from enemy? Friends were those who actively worked for Algerians' independence, i.e. the FLN, and its supporters in Algeria, anti-colonial people in France, formerly colonized nations throughout the world. Enemies were those who worked against Algerian independence, i.e. colonial government in Algeria and its supporters, the government in Paris and its followers, developed nations with a vested interest in maintaining the imperialist status quo. This is what allows, quote, every individual living in Algeria to be an Algerian. This is why friends and enemies are distinguished by the choices they make, the positions they take with regard to the struggle for independence and for socialism. All right. We're doing part 2. How are we doing, everybody? How do you feel? How do you feel about this? Any things before we move?
I just want to say on the mentioning of Manichaeanism and how Manichaeanism is not enough for liberation.
It said revenge. Revenge is not enough.
Oh, yeah, revenge. Sorry. But you know what? I'll save it for the end.
I think I know where you're going with, because it needs to change its character to self-awareness and actual acts that bring on a revolution and liberation process.
Yeah, the thing that's perceived as good needs to be through action, not through the oppression that one has to deal with. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which I see a lot of people doing is moralizing their own oppression, making it seem as if they're good because they are oppressed, rather than they are good because they exist.
Yeah. What's up? What's up? Do you want to say something real quick before I start reading again?
No, I just want to say what's up, comrades, and listening.
What's up? Sweet. Thank you for listening in. All right, let's get to part 2, concerning violence and the development of new people. So like that's another thing too, the development of the new species of people, and the fact that anybody that supports the FLN in the struggle for Algeria need to be an Algerian. That's pretty cool. All right. In the first 2 chapters of Wretched, Fanon emphasizes that armed violence is essential to the initiation and maintenance of colonialism, IG. Quote, their first encounter was marked by violence and their existence together. That is to say, the exploitation of the native by the settler was carried on by dint of a great array of bayonets and cannons. He also sets out to show how the why armed violence is also a necessary means for the successful pursuit of national and social revolution, because decolonization, quote, can only triumph if we use all means to turn the scales, including, of course, that of armed violence. His emphasis. Since the publication of Wretched, people have read those and similar lines and come away with a narrow or one-sided concept of violence. They've read the first two chapters and come away with little or more than a belief in the need to pick up the gun. The people of Africa have suffered for this. We've suffered for it, and our children and grandchildren suffer for it today. Too many of us still fail to understand that the underlying aim of social revolution is to promote a change in people and to assist the development of political and social consciousness. Everything else that we usually associate with revolution or national liberation comes through and after change in the people's consciousness. So consciousness is important. Mediate on, quote, all means. Most people read that line, and by the time they get to the last word in the sentence violence, they've totally forgotten that all means. Consequently, that what they come away with is something like decolonization can only succeed if we use armed violence. And this reading and understanding leaves something out. The absence proves itself a subsequent practice. And the use of all means demands theory and practice on all levels and in all social spheres. Our job is to determine how to do this based on the conditions that we find our own social reality, especially as we want to move from a low tide to a high tide. Our job is to acquire an understanding of the weak links in the system of oppression that binds us in the 20th century USA, where revolution has failed not once, but several times before. Meditate again when you get to 1.6. As Fanon says that from the actual formulation of the program, one must have decided to overcome all obstacles now, but limit yourself and think that all obstacles will present themselves as only military phenomenons. All obstacles means obstacles on the economic level and the socio-cultural level and on the political level. As you formulate a program, you must have a broad vision, a comprehensive social platform that addresses issues of mental and physical health, education, social services of all kinds, economic welfare, and production and distributions of food and clothing, adequate housings. You have to understand that you and the people are waging a struggle to fully control and administer your own society, and you must assume responsibility beyond those of wanting to vent your frustrations or act out your ideal conceptions of heroic guerrilla and merely go out and shoot at somebody. And of course, this awesome responsibility, as James Boggs called it, requires unity and coordinated effort, because no one person can do everything, but every person can do something, and all jobs are more or less equally important. That is, the soldier is no more important, may in fact be less important than the person putting out the newsletter, or a person organizing the students, or a person agitating on issues such as non-rent housing or people's control of the airwaves. This need to understand that all means must be used is why Fanon quickly brings to our attention subjects which are meant to be sharpen our understandings and to broaden our concept of violence, i.e. Manichaean, dualist, white supremacist, and racial ideology. The latter points to the process of their deconstruction, forms of avoidance employed by oppressed people, and the ways that we exercise violence upon each other. while avoiding confrontations with the oppressive apparatus, narrow bourgeois nationalism, and its pitfalls. The process of forming new collective identity, relations between leaders and the people, class struggle, and the need for ever greater people's democracy. All the colonial violence is, democracy, all of this in the first chapter. He does this in order to show that colonial violence is a single process which manifests itself several forms: social, cultural, political, economic, and military, and the counter-violence and revolutionary violence of the oppressed peoples must also be exercised as a comprehensive process, assuming several forms. And of course, another one. They don't like me today. Today they don't like me. It's within this context that Fanon speaks of violence as he closes the second chapter. Violence alone, violence committed by the people, violence organized and educated by its leaders, makes it possible for the masses to understand social truth and give key to them. My emphasis, meditate. What does it mean to educate violence so that people may thus understand social truth? How does the education of violence give the key to the people? Most importantly, what is the key? Can I forward those questions to anybody on here? First question, if anybody wants to answer. How many people thus understand, what does it mean to educate violence so that people may thus understand social truth? Does anybody have anything on that? It's okay if you don't.
We have to let the people understand that counter-violence is not necessarily violence when it's counter-violence to state oppression.
Anybody else?
I got nothing.
I think it's also to understand that we're going to be purposeful when it comes to engaging in a protracted people's war or a physical thing, that we also need to understand to not be adventurous and just go out and do the thing by ourselves, that it requires all of us. And through all those things, like you said too, Joe, it brings out social truth, Here's another one. How does education of violence give the key to the people?
I thought I kind of answered that already.
Okay, cool. Most importantly, okay, we did it. We're good.
What is the key? I think the key is praxis and theory.
Practice, education,
Practice
all those.
and
Yep.
theory.
Okay, no worries. All right, here we go. We're moving on. All right, here we go. Maybe we're not far enough into the book to begin answering these questions, or maybe we can go back to the preface in the search. In this violence, which springs from the people, the military, political, and social necessities cannot be separated. Could it be that to educate violence, we must increase our political and social awareness? Ooh, violence is educated. The people are educated via the development of theory and the conduct of practice in all areas of social life. Violence is educated. As the people develop their political consciousness and as they assume what de Ladun calls collective mastery of society, the key can't be a key of violence, narrowly speaking, more armed forms, because an educated violence is that which provides the key. Only when we understand violence, i.e. colonial and revolutionary, in a broad way, can we begin to understand the key as the awareness derived by the people of their role as the makers of history. History where here being all of the activity of people in pursuit of their aims as sovereign entities. entity. Making history requires the making of uninformed choices and the making of decisions to act in one way and not another. Choices must be made based on a particular interpretation of reality. Read Wretched carefully, and you will see that Fanon talks much less about the use of arms than he does about the need for people to develop their consciousness and to learn to lead themselves. Check it out. Here, we are reading a chapter on violence, which most of us think of only in terms of arms and physical force. But how much does Fanon actually talk of arms or physical force? You might expect every page to contain some mention of guns, knives, armed encampments, guerrillas training in the forest, nightly raids on farms of settlers, attacks on local police stations or military outposts. But how much is actually there? In this chapter on violence, not much. You say, well, why don't we think about this? Because violence is not just physical. It's also fighting against the system. It's also helping people understand what the system does and how to face it and how to organize against it and it's distribute stuff and need to people.
Yeah, like an example would be like rhetorical violence, how it frames a group of people or a person in a certain way that increases a certain way that they will be treated.
Yep. Okay, we're doing good. Haven't found a stopping point yet. Let's find out. Come on. Just looking ahead. Doesn't look like there's a lot. Ooh, not too much of a stopping points ahead. Okay, cool. Thank you. Anybody else before I go? Okay, doesn't look like anybody else. All right. Fanon doesn't talk much about guns or armed forms of violence because it's the other forms. Rather, it's the whole of colonial violence that most concerns him, i.e., IG. Quote, in the colonial context, the settler only ends his work by breaking in the native when the latter admits loudly and intelligibly the supremacy of the white man's values. In the period of decolonization, the colonized masses mock as these very values insult them and vomit them up. My emphasis. And we're going to learn this. As soon as the native begins to pull on his moorings and to cause anxiety to the settler, he is handing over a well-meaning souls who in culture congresses point out to him the specificity and wealth of Western values. But every time Western values are mentioned, they produce in the native a sort of stiffness or muscular lockjaw. During the period of decolonization, the native reasons is applied to. He is offered definite values. He is told frequently that decolonization need not mean regression, and that he must put his trust in qualities which are well tried, solid, and highly esteemed. But it so happens that when the native hears a speech about Western culture, he pulls out his knife, or at least he makes sure that it is within reach. The violence with which the supremacy of white values is affirmed, and the aggressiveness which has permeated the victory of these values over the ways of life and thought of the native mean that in revenge the native laughs in mockery laughs in mockery when Western values are mentioned in front of him. In the colonial context, the settler only ends his work of breaking in the native when the latter admits loudly and intelligibly the supremacy of the white man's values. In the period of decolonization, the colonized masses mock at these very values, insult them, and vomit them up. Many of us used to think that values were important, and we thought this in part because some among us used to think, and some still think, that values were the whole, and they're not, and they are not. They are an important part of the whole. We must give attention to all parts of the whole. Colonial violence must be negated by revolutionary violence, i.e., when the colonized mock Western and Euro-American values, insult them and vomit them out during the period of decolonization, a period in fact comparable to our 1960s and early 1970s, when we had, for example, a quote black arts movement, a debate and debated the need for the values of black aesthetic, and the poets rapped about new values as they mocked those of the man. The singers sang about new values as they insulted those of the system. The writers wrote novels and essays about new values, and they vomited those of white America. But today, we still send our children to the schools of the U.S., there where they pledge allegiance to the U.S. and its flag, and in 1,000 ways every day. We and our children admit loudly and intelligibly the supremacy of Euro-American capitalist values, and demonstrate the effectiveness of colonial violence and the absence of counter-violence, a revolutionary violence which negates the influence of foreign values, i.e. capitalist values, in our homes and in our minds. We can take it backward without a break to, for example, the 1660s, and see that there and then, too, we mock the settlers' values, even as he tried to suppress our new national identity and undermine our purpose of regaining our new national independence. Quote, "What's your name, boy?" Ugh, I hate that. Quote unquote. Uncayenta uncanti. Mother frecker. What?
Kunta Kinte.
Kunta Kinte, mother fricker. I'm not saying that. We seldom, if ever, think of ourselves as among those petty bourgeois forces in need of committing class suicide. But we must remember where we are, here in the seat of the empire. Of empire, even the slaves are petty bourgeois, and our property, our poverty is not what it would be if we didn't in 1,000 ways also benefit from spoils of the exploitation of peoples throughout the world. Our passivity wouldn't be what it is if not for our thinking what we have something to lose. How much more necessary must it be for us to focus on the need to develop a revolutionary consciousness here in the belly of the beast, where even the so-called radical left is little more than a appendage of bourgeoisie liberalism, and in many cases serves as a buffer between capitalist colonialism and the people's struggles for independence and socialism. All critical thought is suppressed by the media and the market and the educational process. All right. I think we're going to stop here. What do you think? What do you think, peoples?
Seems like you're gonna do that there for me.
Yeah, same here. And also, right. I think that I think it pointed out a lot of problems that need to be taken care of.
Like what?
Like how sometimes we get so involved in our own issues that we end up forgetting about other people's issues, and how that ends up leading to an incomplete analysis of what's going on, which leads to some form of decadence.
Yeah. And the thing is we got to start doing that, right? We got to start thinking, and part of isn't part of deconstructing like the capitalist mindset is to think collectively and to try to be as collectivist as you can amongst your comrades, and to rely on comrades to be able to observe the observable reality of the world, the objectiveness. Isn't that important isn't that the whole purpose of like dialectical materialism? In a sense, we can do it for ourselves, but in a sense, we should also do it for the conditions that set for us. We should live and breathe and be collective mindset in a sense, and to develop a culture of collectivism amongst each other as comrades.
Yeah. And also to deconstruct what people think when they think collectivism, because when people think of collectivism, they don't think of what we think of. What they end up thinking is conformity. They end up thinking step in line sort of stuff, when in actuality it's quite literally just
Adding.
like take care of each other. That's it.
Yeah. Adding. I also like to realize too that like Fanon does talk about the mass line theory, about how the party needs, basically, I don't know exactly, but they basically went through like how FLN needs to be connected to the mass base, the guerrilla, all those things need to be connected. You know what I mean? So they also talked about utilizing like a bit of a mass line theory between the people and the movements and stuff like that too. Because it's important to always stay attached to the masses, because the masses will rise out of their conscious liberation process, the correct line in engaging the material conditions into bringing on like a socialist revolution. All these things. Organic intellectuals is a Maoist position that we produce organic intellectuals, but I also do like the second part of that hopefully by teaching and stuff, by these things, is like what Walter Rodney does, is do a class suicide thing where you're like, yeah, you get your tenure, you get your PhD, but you don't disconnect from the masses and their struggles. You add to their masses and the struggles, and you help bring the revolution to more of a perpetuation into being successful. Sorry. Anybody else?
I mean, I was just staying silent so I didn't have a monopoly on the conversation.
Yeah, I know. Anybody else want to talk about it? Anybody else have anything to add? Feedback, criticisms, reflections?
You knew. I was here to listen.
All right. No pushback. That's great. That's good. Okay. Is anybody...
And, I like Fanon.
I like Fanon too. I like Fanon a lot. Anybody else have anything before we close out? I need to follow you again? Go ahead.
I know this is off topic, but have you guys been following the current conflict?
Iran? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been.
Yeah, it's starting to escalate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crap. Is it just rumor, or did their leader die? Because I've been seeing that.
Listen, I'm gonna take that with a grain of salt until it's confirmed by Iran themselves. Then I'm gonna take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, me too. I'm like sitting there like, what does this mean? Because what it does is it shows dissension and makes people like dissent instead of like
yeah. Like, because it's
support.
just the U.S. It's a playbook by the U.S. and Izzy that they always do psychological warfare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they utilize psychological. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I stopped for you.
I mean, they did say unless it's confirmed, unless it's reported by his personal page or by his personal aid and ministry, then yeah, I mean, I'm taking it with a grain of salt. And even if he were, it wouldn't change the course of the war. I mean,
it should.
They have contingencies and sitting in successors.
Yeah. Oh, someone in the comments said, I don't know, is this person a comrade? They said that it's been confirmed, but I'll take that with a grain of salt too, and
Yeah, me too. I'm taking it with a grain of salt.
Yeah,
I guess we'll know. I guess we'll know more tomorrow because at this point of time, it's a fog of war.
Yeah. All right.
So
we'll keep an eye on that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been following it on Telegram and other stuff and other pages too. I've been following the news about it.
That's probably the best place to follow is on Telegram, honestly, isn't it? Wouldn't that be better?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. How many appeals have I had to do today?
Iniquity, Iran. Yeah. I did hear that a couple of American soldiers were on a lot too, and some were wounded in Kuwait.
Oh my God.
But as Trump said, that's a sacrifice he's willing to make.
Yep.
The point of the matter is
the war for the elites, like usual.
The point of the matter is the U.S. won't be able to sustain this war for a week.
Yeah, I heard that they don't have the supplies to do it.
Yeah, they don't have the ammunition or the resources to sustain this war for like up to at least 5 to 4 days.
Yeah. Do you see the necessity for our revolution to happen?
Yeah.
The primary contradiction to the world is the United States. In order for this to stop, we have to do the overthrowing. Period. We have to stop. We have to do this internal fucking overthrow to stop the United States and its contradictions on the world. We have to do our thing. I'm sorry. That's the answer. If we want to help stabilize and not create like the huge crisis at the border bullshit, then we need to overthrow the United States.
Also, what I do know is that this is just the beginning of the end of America's time in the West Asia. Yeah. After this war, America will no longer be in West Asia. They're gonna be pushed out.
My question is oh crap. I forgot I had it, and now it's gone. Oh well. It's gone. Oh, that was my question. Do you think Joe, did you mention this, I think? Do you think Trump will declare like martial law so that he stays president during the war?
I don't think he's going to have to declare martial law. I think he's already taking care of it in different ways.
Yeah, he's just what I heard that he might do is he might cancel midterm elections
for wartime.
Yeah,
figures.
Because that's the whole point. I mean, and then people are saying that the Epstein file, it's a distraction from the Epstein files. No, it's not. You're thinking too small. I mean,
no, the Epstein file is a distraction for their imperialistic.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Because if they were genuine with the Epstein files, they would release it and redact only the victims and say everything is transparent. They wouldn't be giving 1% here, 1% there. They'd fucking be transparent, but they're not. They're like you said, they're utilizing it for distraction to do their bullshit.
Yeah. This is it's just American imperialism. I mean, the U.S. has been wanting to attack Iran for decades.
Yeah.
This was always the plan.
Yeah. All right, then. I don't know if Two Spirit's going to go live tonight. We don't know. Depends if, I don't know. I think Chicken Strip's in there. So we'll find out later.
Yeah.
You think? Okay. Okay. That's cool. Does anybody have anything to say before we close out?
Much love and take care.
Sweet. Benny?
No, but see you later, comrades.
See you later. And last but not least, Joe.
Good night, everybody. Love you.
All right. Love you all. Good night.